In some ways, James, I also want to thank you. In some ways, I find myself on unfamiliar grounds. That can be terribly intimidating. At forums such as ours, I've had the privilege of being a chair, a discussant, a panelist, and even a host moderator, whereas this poor taxing job at our forum. In each named case, yes, even as host moderator, one can depend on a set of remarks, however informal, which one can prepare beforehand. Being a chronicler, for lack of a better term, or providing a summary, does not allow for that convenience. What is more striking, and more strikingly intimidating, is trying to chronicle this particular forum. I have had the honor of being involved in over 40 some odd such gatherings in the last dozen years, starting with the venerable Ukraine's Quest Roundtable in 2000, with the help of my friends at that time, Minister Zarychkyj and Oliver Truk, who had to leave, who was at that time the Chief of Staff for Prime Minister Yushchenko, and continuing with a series of Euro-Atlantic forums in Ukraine, Brussels, in the United States again. And I will readily admit that this forum and the parliamentary hearings that preceded have provided more intellectual and political firepower than any single set of gatherings that I can recall. I guess that I should have surmised as much when I saw the final draft of the program, and then again when I looked across the crowd at our opening dinner. I was actually stunned. I'm stunned and delighted by this crowd today. Highly placed representatives of the three corners of the Euro-Atlantic community, Canada, US, EU, and yes, Germany should be included in this. Nico, I hope you haven't left. We know how much you have done in regard to the Ukrainian issue. Ukraine's most articulate political players and civil society activists, Democratic Russia's most distinguished spokesman, the best set of policy wonks on the planet. If you haven't, and can you imagine in one panel an Ariel Cohen and a James Shear? I mean, you can't buy tickets to that theater. A sizable cross-section of Canada's political leadership, and an equally sizable cross-section of the Ukrainian-Canadian Armada leadership. I'm stunned by what I've seen in the last 2 days. I truly am, and humbled by it. Anyway, having confronted the intimidation factor, or the fear factor, I've put it in the past and ready to shortly turn to the task at hand, shortly. The forum, as it appeared to me, divided into two parts. The first part was an attempt to assess Ukraine's internal development, or more practically, to provide Ukraine with a report card, that we have been talking about, in 4 categories in this case. Democracy issues, economic and social cohesion issues, energy issues, and the general security or national sovereignty issue. The second part was an attempt, or second part of this conference, there seem to be 2 distinct sections, was an attempt to divine the external factors impinging on Ukraine's internal development. In real terms, the speakers attempted to tackle the Russia question in Ukraine, particularly in light of Vladimir Putin's recent re-election, or as Mr. Amsterdam said, whatever it was, as supreme leader, president, or whatever it is he will call himself now, of Russia. Now, the first effort proved quite a somber affair. The speakers, and there are so many of them that I will try to name some, but I can't promise. The speakers involved in assessing Ukraine's internal development clearly indicated that the sunny, if overly anarchistically democratic years of the Orange, 2005 to 2009, clearly ground to a halt in 2010. At first, all sides prayed that the regress would not be noticeable, given that Yanukovych's, that's my favorite name for him, Yanukovych's declared Euro integration aims were clearly stated by him at the beginning of his term as president. But by 2011, it appears that such hopes have been misplaced. Yanukovych initially consolidated the Vertikal in all three branches, and then launched a campaign to secure that Vertikal through the 2000, has now launched a campaign to secure that Vertikal through the 2012 parliamentary elections, by making certain that the political opposition will be partially, if not fully, leaderless. But Yanu's apparent single-minded efforts at securing his and Regents' political future have left him neglecting Ukraine's social, economic, energy, and security needs. All that wonderful workman Dr. Austin had put up indicates in a very direct way what we've been talking about. In each category, the speakers noted sizable regress in each of these other categories, not just the political, democracy, but in the social cohesion category, in the energy category, in the economic category, and in the national security. All of this has weakened the Ukrainian state immeasurably. Yanukovych's own situation, his house of cards, resembles that of the old Turkish sultans, and here I'm borrowing from my friend Alexander Motin, at the beginning of the 20th century, or of the failed Arab leaders of the 21st century. Mubarak, Gaddafi, and Assad come to mind. Now, the second effort of this conference, looking at the external factors impinging on Ukraine, proved equally sobering. The audience of the forum was probably hoping that Putin's re-election efforts might prove a greater question in the international forum. We were hoping until last week, especially in the mass media centers from UK to US to EU to Canada, but apparently, and we've heard it at our forum, apparently, now in the post-March 4th sort of sense of things, that may not be the case. If so, it is clear from what we've heard, whether it's from James Shearer, or from Ariel Cohen, or from Andrei Yanukovsky, it is clear that if Putin feels good about his victory and consolidates his situation in Russia, even temporarily, then Ukraine, badly weakened by Yanu's Sultan-like activities, again, all credit to Alexander Motin for that, is in for the ride of its life. Putin will certainly play the energy card as the beginning, but it will not end there. It will go on to food, metals, chemicals, aerospace, information technology. He and his Silovik oligarchic allies will move in on everything in Ukraine that is not nailed down. And even that which is nailed down probably won't stay nailed down. At that point, Ukraine's national sovereignty will be at risk fundamentally. And as Ariel and Van Valentin and Ms. Amanda Paul and James pointed out, some form of union, whichever form it might take. Given the named conclusions reached in both efforts that we've heard during the forum, one might see nothing but a bleak landscape that Ukraine might just slip into its terrible, unwanted past, and such an assessment would not be beyond the pale. But, under the surface, every one of the speakers, last night and today, seemed to find solace in another fact that seems apparent. Whether we want to or not, stronger or weaker sentiment on this, Ukrainian civil society is quite alive. Orange did have an impact on that level. let us not forget that it did, and is not planning to disappear. It is rooted in what Zbigniew Brzezinski calls the young, urban, middle-class Ukrainians, who are quickly becoming what Szczerbak once called bourgeois nationalistes, the Soviets' greatest threat. It has spread from the strictly political sphere, the political opposition, the original Maidan, to the socio-economic sphere, small and medium businesses in eastern Ukraine, or what's called the economic Maidan, from the political to the economic to the religious Maidan. And it's very interesting what might happen on this, what a concept, a roundtable. A national roundtable in Ukraine which may deal with this religious and moral Maidan that may be established, which may in fact include Guza, Filaret, and Volodymyr Sabadyan of the Moscow Patriarchate. Incredible. In making that, we are now looking at the possibility that we will have not one or two, but three Maidans out of this civil society that we're contemplating. And more than and the last point of this, or the second point of this wonderful thing that we've heard about the civil society, is that the civil society has real support on two fronts. One, a real set of friends in the governments and NGOs, many of whom were here. I'm stunned by the amount of friends that Ukraine actually has. I'm stunned. I remember in 2000, when we first started, there were questions about the Euro-Atlantic things. We thought that NATO and the EU were something completely inaccessible. 10, 12 years later, we're talking about it as it's a natural occurrence, and the fact that Ukraine is sliding away from it seems like a mistake. More important, there has been an indication, and I listened very carefully to Mr. Markian-Shvech's presentation, and Ariel repeated it again, there is this thing called the Worldwide Ukrainska Armada. In the United States and in Canada alone, 2.5 million people. Around the world, we are looking at millions of Ukrainians in Europe who may have come out for work, but they are now getting organized. Mr. Evhenishvili knows this through the World Congress. We know it through the World Ukrainian Forum. All of that firepower is there as well, and is usable in a way that other folks don't have. That there are other nations that don't have that firepower. Our worst enemies have given us a diaspora that is so large and so worldwide that it stretches from Vancouver to Vladivostok, and we can make use of it. Given all of that, I suspect that our august forum has come to the same conclusion, and this is where I leave the conclusion, that 5 EU foreign ministers came to in an op-ed in the International Herald Tribune 2 days ago. And I suspect that neither they nor our forum will mind me reading their final words very shortly, that last 2 paragraphs of their op-ed declaration, as our final sentiment for this get-together. Quote, "We see ourselves as Ukraine's allies. We believe in the people of Ukraine and Ukraine's democratic and economic potential. We know that the road of reforms which Ukraine has chosen to take is long and challenging. But we are convinced that closer and political and economic ties, as well as people-to-people contacts between EU and Ukraine, offer huge benefits for both partners. 20 years of independence and sovereignty have brought an irreversible change in the mentality of Ukrainian society." Landsbergis said that to us in a conference 2 years ago. He said, 20 years have passed. There's an entire generation of young Ukrainians who don't remember an enemy force running that particular society or state. Do not. Internal, possibly, but not external forces. The people of Ukraine are Europeans and share European values. Our goal is to anchor Ukraine in the European family, as symbolized through the signing and ratification of the association agreement. We call on the Ukrainian leadership, and here I'm putting it in skupkach, I guess both Vlada and the political opposition, to display the political courage and wisdom needed for this to happen. With that sentiment, I would like to leave this conference. I think this has been, of the conferences that we've had, perhaps the most world-shaking. And it would have happened in Canada because the Ukrainian-Canadian Armada in Canada truly does have the kind of power that only that Ukrainian diasporas in other countries could only dream of. We've seen it. We hope that you continue this tradition. This is a good tradition.